Hello, everybody, and welcome to Sound of Science, a series of podcasts hosted by EUCOPE, a European trade body representing small and mid-sized companies active in health technologies. My name is Stefano Romanelli, and I am Senior Government Affairs Manager at EUCOPE. Today, we are diving into the EU Biotech Act and how it can support the biopharmaceutical sector thriving in the EU. Before moving forward, we'd like to kindly ask you to click on the subscribe button for our podcast and follow us on LinkedIn to stay up to date on all of the latest news and initiatives within the world of European life sciences. Following the Commission's communications on building the future with nature, boosting biotechnology and biomanufacturing in the EU from March 2024, the European Commission has included the EU Biotech Act under its legislative mandate. This was reiterated in the EU Competitiveness Compass in January 2025. According to this document, the Biotech Act will provide a forward looking framework conducive to innovation in areas like health technology assessment and clinical trials. And more generally, it will leverage the potential that biotechnologies can bring to the economy. We understand that the Act will be published in 2026. In this episode, we will discuss what are our expectations for the Biotech Act and share some recommendations on what is needed to enhance a strong biopharmaceutical sector. Our guests for these episodes are Johanna Grames from AOP Health and Erwan Gicquel from Miltenyi Biomedicine. Welcome. So, we have great topics to discuss, and let's just jump right in the discussion. And I would start with the first question about the biopharmaceutical sector. This sector includes companies that are active in areas such as orphan medicinal products and advanced therapies. And these companies have a pivotal role not only for EU competitiveness and strategic autonomy, but also for EU's economic growth, productivity, and job creation, and to address unmet needs of people living in the EU. You both work for EU biotech companies. Could you share your perspective on the role and impact of red biotech in the EU and also beyond the EU? And I will start with Johanna.
Yeah, happy to share. So, I do work at AOP Health. We are a European entrepreneur for rare diseases and critical care. We were founded almost 30 years ago as, let's say, a small living room startup in Austria. And now we are a pan European company with over 700 employees and branches in the Middle East and soon also in the US, which is quite exciting. And we still have our research and development headquarters in Vienna. I think that's a nice success story of growth of a European company. And it leads to job opportunities and also to innovation that we can export and create wealth. In a world where industries change a lot and we often read about negative outlooks for economy, I think it's even more important to have a strong biotech and life sciences industry with a bright future. And we would love to see much more of life science companies growing in Europe.
Thanks, Johanna. I indeed share this remark about the importance of growing more life sciences companies in Europe. And Erwan, maybe on your side, some introductory words.
Thank you, Stefano. Yeah, I think so. First of all, about my company, Miltenyi is also a European company, biotech company. We are specialized in cell and gene therapies. We are headquartered in Germany, in Bergisch Gladbach, which is close to Cologne. And the company is offering innovative products and services that support biomedical research and advanced cellular therapies. Miltenyi Biotech, which is our mother company, if you want, was founded in 1989, and we are now around 5,000 employees worldwide, and we offer something like or more than 19,000 high-tech biotechnology and medical technology products. You ask us what is the perspective on the role and impact of red biotech in the EU. I think what our sector, healthcare, pharma, biotech, address for us in society are twofold. One is treatment for severely ill patients, and the other one is having a healthy workforce. So it's not only an essential sector for the competitiveness of Europe, as it was highlighted by Draghi in its report last year, but also what we do in advancing the understanding of disease, underlying cause of disease, is very important to help developing precise therapies, such as cell and gene therapies that we're specialized in order to combat root cause of disease beyond curative effect.
Thank you, Erwan. And maybe Johanna, you want to add something on your side in this overview context on biotech?
Exactly. Yeah, I just was thinking it's really so important to include the aspect of the unmet needs that we are striving to address, and especially for us in the field of rare diseases. When we think that 30 million Europeans suffer from an orphan disease, and these are actually more than from many other major disease, and still only a very small part of patients is having a therapy or even an option for cure. And I think it's really our responsibility to take all efforts in Europe to develop therapies for those patients.
I agree, and we need an economic and regulatory framework where such efforts are economically feasible. So this makes the EU Biotech Act so important to us.
Yeah, and obviously this matters because, yeah, providing innovative treatments that affect the health of us European citizens, this is very important. And we do that already when we run clinical trials to make sure that patients are covered and they're getting the most innovative treatments possible. And we can also export this health, obviously, and reduce suffering around the world.
Yeah, and it's also definitely a sector that requires highly expertise and highly skilled employees, and it's something where we can do a lot of work on. Thank you both for this initial overview. I think it's already insightful and leads us to discuss a bit more in details some of the potential recommendations for the EU Biotech Act. Indeed, as we were saying, a strong EU biopharmaceutical ecosystem requires policy that offset challenges for innovative companies, especially small and mid-sized ones like the companies you represent. And the EU Biotech Act can certainly play a pivotal role in this direction. So, what are the initiatives needed to tackle existing challenges and to enhance the full potential of this sector? What can we ask for as part of the EU Biotech Act? What should be we asking for in this upcoming initiative? And maybe I will start with Erwan.
Yes, thank you. It's essential when we're thinking about the resilience of the supply chain, the independence from third countries. Europe will need to increase not only financial but also regulatory support to biotech companies. Just looking at labor costs, we'll need to incentivize one way or another our biotech companies so that they can compete with companies in China or the US, and they can either establish or expand their research and production sites in Europe. We'll need to speed up transition of early developments through more and easier access to public and private funding. So, for instance, we could have a European Biotech Innovation Fund, which would complement existing funds which already exist under the EIC, the ERC, the EIB, or national funds. But we need to have the money to be able to incentivize this sector. I think we should also have something like the NIH in the US, call it a European Biotech Agency, but something similar that will be responsible for driving investments and fostering public-private partnerships. This would also have the beauty to bring together knowledge and expertise, all of that in one place. And altogether, I think we will need more transnational cooperation with fewer but bigger biotech clusters, which would be truly multinational.
Yeah, I agree. Transnational, but also translational research. But I guess we get to that later. And I think it's great that the critical medicines act already proposes some incentives, as you mentioned, to support European production and European biomanufacturing. We at AOP Health, for example, we produce all finished products in Europe and most of our API as well in the EU. But anyways, facing global competition remains really challenging. And especially if we play only a price game. So what I think is that European production really needs to have a value for the payers, and it also needs to be competitive.
Yeah, completely agree. I mean, we need in general, a more business-friendly ecosystem and a less complex regulatory framework. I think that's something that everybody recognizes, which is essential for driving our sector. For example, we need to address the disharmonized implementation of the clinical trials regulation in Europe. We have multiple non-uniform clinical trials applications, and all of that create not only a lot of bureaucracy, but also it delays the initiation of clinical trials.
Yeah, the idea of the clinical trial regulation to have only one European system was good. Just how it actually works now, it takes really, really long to have trials set up. So, for example, we just recently done a single site phase one study, and it took 100 days for approval. Whereas earlier, before we had the harmonized clinical trial regulation, we were just going to the country that we know was fast, and we could start after, let's say, 30 days. So we still need some opportunities to have also quick ways, especially for easy setup of clinical trials, to be faster.
Yeah, I think since we've discussed, I think we should think about establishing a centralized coordinated procedures for biotech products under the supervision of the EMA, and building on the progresses that to date that exist. This will address the fragmentation that we just discussed earlier and that exists in the current system, but it also will support the continuity of knowledge building from trials through to marketing authorization processes and even into the post-marketing setting. I think also the EMA should be encouraged to keep manufacturing guidance for biologics and for biotechnology derived products up to date. It's not the case today, and we need that pretty soon.
And on top of that, when we think about biopharmaceutical spendings, we should really reframe them as, let's say, strategic investments. So we need to encourage the member states to treat healthcare and pharmaceutical spending as a long-term investment rather than costs only. This would definitely emphasize the value of innovation for healthcare systems, and this could include update EU accounting rules or broadening health outcome indicators.
We need to build that framework that makes investment in biotech attractive, as you said, Johanna. Private capital is crucial for a significant boost. We must first realize that biotech research and development is an international business. So we are in direct. We spoke a bit about that earlier, but we are in direct competition with nations such as the US and China, but also countries like Israel, Switzerland, and other countries who are making great efforts to thrive biotech developments. They have realized that the healthcare industry is a very strong economic component, and biotechnology is a main driver.
That's also important on a national level, actually. I'm also engaged at Biotech Austria, where we often discuss the fact of missing capital to invest. I did learn in that working groups that the insurances and pension funds are actually legally allowed to invest, but still we only see a minority who actually do that. So we need a lot of education for investors and also more providers of funds to have a bundle to stratify risks and to make investments easier and possible also for huge institutions who don't have this in-depth knowledge of our industry.
Thanks. Thank you both. I think it's really a lot already, and this shows how many actions we can take, foster the sector, and how many opportunities we have to make sure that the biopharmaceutical sector in the EU remains competitive. And maybe to quickly mention another couple of things, we have a lot of potential also with the use of AI and health data, also with the European data space. And there are some actions that we could do to modernize the definition of companies' tires for biopharmaceuticals, especially introducing a definition for small and mid caps that goes beyond the current SME definition for these companies that are not SME but are not large companies and often will need financial and regulatory support but cannot access to it because of the current definitions. And as I mentioned earlier, it's also important to try to make sure that there is enough talent across the EU, and this can be done by increasing the jobs, but also the education on scientific subjects, and also attracting scientists from other countries, and maybe bringing back European scientists, since many have gone in other countries to do research, and it's really talents that we risk losing.
Yeah.
But the Biotech Act that we have discussed quite extensively is not the only piece of legislation or initiative that influence our sector. And to create a strong biotech ecosystem and deliver also on the ambition of the Commission to keep the EU competitive in the biopharmaceutical sector, we need to give consideration to other legislations that indeed might have a positive but also disproportionate impact on the sector. So, which additional actions and legislations should the EU consider to support innovative small and mid-sized companies and nurture the biopharmaceutical ecosystem? I will begin with Johanna.
Yeah, the most important pharma legislation that's currently discussed of obviously is the pharma package, including the general pharmaceutical legislation, where a crucial point for us is to really have incentives to invest in development of pharmaceutical therapies. And this is most importantly the orphan market exclusivity and the regulatory data protection. So, meaning that you do have some protection in order to get your investments back before it gets generic and you cannot earn money with it anymore. And for this is very important to have this time frame, given the long development cycles that we have in our industry. Patent is not the only way to protect, so we really need this regulatory protection as well, especially in the orphan space and especially for small and mid-sized companies that don't have the capabilities to build up big patent families from the very scratch because we are small by nature. So this is really essential to have a proper protection system. And when it comes to that, we are also sometimes discussing that a global orphan marketing authorization, meaning that when you already have an indication on the market, you can extend the protection time with developing new indications. Currently, this is plus 1 year, and it's limited. So you cannot, for every indication, get another year. But there are restrictions, so there's really no incentive when you already have some mechanism developed to go for additional indications. And this is really something that we need to change, because when we already proved safety, why not doing just another clinical trial to show also efficacy in another indication, which is maybe close to the one we already developed, but maybe also not. But it would be a rather easy win for companies to develop more therapies in that field. And especially in the rare disease field, I think this is very crucial. And one more thing also in the regulatory framework, when we're talking about orphans, so orphan drug designation is something that's given early and at the time point of marketing authorization. You again have to run through this assessment for approval to really get the orphan drug designation in order to get the orphan market exclusivity. However, anyways, on the markets, you have to prove it again that you can show benefits to comparative therapies. When you compare this to the US, then when you start the development, you get the orphan designation because you treat an orphan indication and you stick to it. It's not been taken away. And this is something that we should really consider. In the US, we have 2,000 orphan drugs registered. In Europe, only 500. So we should really change this system and make sure that we have a much more orphan therapies that actually make it through and don't get reversed on that.
It's very true. The market access policy environment is quite a challenge with 27 different national health technology assessments. The data requirements that you just highlighted are so important and so often different from one member state to another, but also different between what the regulators are asking for and what the payers are asking for. So that just navigating that puzzle is a challenge for everybody, but for the small companies like ours, it's even more because we're not established in every single countries, and it's an issue. So long-term data as the one that you describe, especially for rare disease patients, are very important and they need to be considered also after approval. The degree of acceptance of uncertainty when it comes to acceptation of real world data, real world evidence compared to head to head trials, which is, of course, the gold standard. But that degree of acceptation, which again varies from one member state to another, makes it even more complicated to anticipate the market potential and we will basically get return on investment. So it's that needs to be addressed one way or another.
Yeah, what you described is covered in the European HTA that was rolled out this year in January. So the Joint Clinical Assessment Framework, where we try to harmonize this market in a way. And especially for us as small and mid-sized companies, it's so important to have predictability of what, let's say, the market wants. So the payers that we are talking with, and early dialogue is really key. So we don't want to be as a health technology developer just yeah getting some ready-made framework and not being on the table to be in an active dialogue. So we really need to have this exchange to understand and to together develop the best therapies possible. Uh, I think that's really a framework that's closely connected to the Biotech Act that we need to think together.
Yeah, I think the Biotech Act must be in line with the other key policy initiatives that are on the table. We mentioned, or Johanna mentioned, the pharma legislation, EU HTA, and the life science strategy is obviously another one. But it's not the only ones. I mean, in general, we need more coherence between EU health research industry policies, but also between EU and national and between regulatory and payers requirements. So the HTA that Johanna covered, I think, is a great example. For us, I mentioned we're a CGT, cell and gene therapy specialized company. Something that really doesn't help us in Europe is the GMO directives, the two GMO directive that applies to innovative cell and gene therapies on top of the EU and national pharmaceutical frameworks, and which are implemented again differently from one member state to another. So this makes it even more complex to get not only the needed licenses for manufacturing cell and gene therapies, but also to conduct clinical trials. So the EU Biotech Act will be, we hope, a unique opportunity to revisit the implementation of the GMO directives, and because we need further exemption for therapeutic HMPs, including, we think, a full derogation from the GMO directives based on a risk-benefit assessment.
Just for the listeners who are not familiar, what does GMO stand for?
Genetic modified organisms.
Yeah, I agree to all what you said. And I'm really happy overall that the Biotech Act is planned and is being rolled out. And I think this is a very positive momentum that we currently see in Europe with the Biotech Act and also the life science strategy that should be very closely interlinked, obviously. And this is not only a European phenomenon currently, we also see that on national level. So we've already seen a pharmaceutical roadmap and a life science strategy being rolled out in Germany and France. And it was also done in Denmark, in Sweden, and Spain. And currently, we see it also in Austria, where we are from, but also in Ireland and Belgium. So there is a huge momentum, and a lot of policymakers discovered that actually our industry is future proof and we are ready to make a big difference. However, to be very honest and frank, a proper biotech development needs a US business case in the end. So when you talk to an investor to get some money, and this is what I hear from the community all the time, you need to include the US. So we really need Europe to wake up. I think we did an important step to do so. And we need to either decrease costs for development, costs, timelines, and risks, to work closer, to collaborate with all the authorities, and or best is both, we need to increase the market power to also attract the pharma biotech in Europe for our European citizens.
Yes, I think this is so true. I mean, we're talking about very competitive competition internationally. We need to think big in order to create the right framework conditions for biotech startups, but not only for startups, for growth companies, for established companies to be the best internationally. And we need at the same time Europe to be very attractive for these companies to locate instead of encouraging a brain drain to other parts of the world.
No, indeed, and I think it's very important that companies of all size can continue growing and have this opportunity to do that in the EU and potentially also bring the new technology elsewhere. And especially in the sector of rare diseases, I think another important proposals could be an EU rare disease action plan that could really help to harmonize at least some basic standards across the member states and do that through the entire life cycle of rare diseases of OMPs, from really early research to diagnosis and access. It could really help and build well in this context that we have discussed about the Biotech Act, the Life Science Strategy, and all the other initiatives.
I fully agree, and it's really not only making these acts and plans, but really to bring it down to earth to make sure we roll it out. So we've seen also national action plans that have never been performed. So I really want them to come into action.
And we had a very interesting exchange so far, and with a lot of ideas discussing the impact of the red biotech sector, some of the potential proposals where we could see the Biotech Act going, and also the interaction between different legislations at both EU and national level. So, at the end of this podcast, what is your key takeaway to ensure a thriving biopharmaceutical sector and Johanna, I will begin with you.
Thanks. Yeah, I already mentioned that, but I want to mention it again because it's so important. Our health systems need to learn to treat healthcare and also pharmaceutical spending as a long term investment rather than costs. And we should not think in silos also in that respect. So, not think in research and not think in market, but combine it. Not think in national and European, but really think it together. And we need to have all those budgets to communicate, and we need to understand that healthier citizens, they need less care, they have less additional health problems, so they are able to be a better workforce, to pay more taxes also, and to engage more in the society for a Europe where we want to live. And in the end, a flourishing biotech ecosystem is not only bringing health to our people, but also jobs and wealth in a future-proof industry. And I think we are ready to enhance this in Europe.
And everyone on your side.
Can only agree with Johanna. We spoke earlier about the importance of having more and easier access to finance. But in order to ensure a thriving biopharmaceutical system, I think we need first a mindset shift where the products of the healthcare biotech innovation sector, such as the cell and gene therapies, are seen as investment and not solely a cost for society and our health systems. So if we achieve this, we'll be successful to drive more investments and more funds into biotech in order to make Europe as a whole more competitive and up for innovation that will ultimately benefit not only our patients, but also our national health systems.
Thank you, Erwan. And maybe to add one final takeaway also from EUCOPE side and the perspective we represent, I think we heard today that to build a thriving biopharmaceutical sector, we need a coherence with different legislations, both at EU and member states level. This also includes regulatory harmonization and avoid administrative duplication that can slow down research and innovation, but also access. And last but not least, a predictable incentive framework with strong IP, strong regulatory incentives, and also financial and regulatory support for companies that invest in innovative medicines. And I think that's it for today. It was a great discussion. We have touched on our expectations and recommendations for the EU Biotech Act. And I think that if properly implemented, this will help a thriving biopharmaceutical environment, which will benefit the whole community from industry to patient, civil society, researchers, academics, and healthcare professionals. Thank you very much, Johanna and Erwan, for sharing your expertise and perspective today and being with us.
Thank you so much. My pleasure.
Thanks a lot. Pleasure too.
That's it for this episode of Sounds of Science, the podcast that keeps you acquainted with the most pressing policy files and news in the world of European life sciences. We are EUCOPE, the European trade body for small to mid-sized innovative companies working in the field of health technologies. You can stay up to date with our work by engaging with us on LinkedIn or visiting our website.